Well, Tim, thank you very much for joining us for Floss Weekly. You gave a keynote this morning where you were talking about the need for empathy in technology. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you see the need for communities to function in today's technology industry?
Well, the point I was making was that there's a relationship between technology and culture that's really important. Starting with open source, we saw a culture of sharing, a culture of being comfortable with disclosing your stuff, warts and all. We saw a culture of reciprocity. And, as we moved forward, open source continues to be central to the technology stack, but the community values are not essential. But we see the values of the human side of technology coming out in other areas. For example, in DevOps, there was recently a post by Jeff Sisna, empathy, the essence of DevOps. It's really about, hey, it's not really about, using these particular tools or how you organize. It's actually about how do you create a culture of communication between developers and operations, for example, or developers in a service-oriented architecture, people who are building different parts of the product. How do they walk in each other's shoes? And then there's a whole development around this idea called promise theory, which is really taken over in the DevOps community, which is how do you create a communications network that consists of a set of promises that people are able to make to each other. And then I kind of went from there to the notion of the failure of healthcare.gov was, a cultural failure more than anything else. It was, the waterfall method of development, procurement, but also the idea that the promises, if you were to think about promise theory, were never able to be made by the people who were building for each other or for users, because the promises were all made by politicians to other politicians, and then somehow were supposed to be magically encoded by the people who are building this thing. And there's this whole shift that I think we are starting to come to, and I've been starting to think about the connections between open source, DevOps, and user-centered design. Because in the end, getting it right for users is also about this idea of empathy.
Right.
Jeff Sisna tweeted in response to my talk this morning, empathy all the way down. And so, at Code for America, for example, we worked last year on a project around food stamps. And, it was just one of these things where the system was broken. People were falling off the rolls and having to reapply because they didn't meet some requirement that they didn't understand. And nobody in the system was actually trying to go through the process and see where it broke. And I think it's so important to go, wait, this really matters in some domains. It's not a matter of like growth hacking, we have to understand what the users are doing so we can get them to, click on more ads or do more in-app purchases or, recommend our site. It's literally, we have users showing up at midnight to buy food because they haven't eaten for 3 days and their food stamp card doesn't work because they got a letter that didn't make any sense to them and nobody noticed.
Yep.
Since they did this new thing where Code for America, now in San Francisco, when you're potentially out of compliance, you get a text message that says, there's a problem, call the office.
Right.
And that simple intervention has has decreased the rate of people falling off the rolls by 40%. That's, huge impact for people. And I guess I was just sort of trying to get across this idea of, we have enormous power as developers. And there's a sort of Silicon Valley cult of disruption. There's a Silicon Valley cult of, we can use all this data to make these services that go viral. But there's also this deeper theme of how do we use this power that we have to understand users and to build services for them, to build things that really matter, and also to build them in a way that is based on human values.
Right.
And that's the part, I think, that's always been at the deep heart of open source, was it was sort of a cultural movement. And I think it's so important to remember that and to keep building on this notion that, with communications technology, with the internet, with the ability to share that we have online, it's actually about making a better world. And I kind of ended with this, my favorite Jack Handey deep thought, which was something like, if aliens came down and said, show us your civilization, we say, oh, this isn't really our civilization. It's just something we're playing around with. Come back in 20 years and we'll show you our real civilization. And, and the fact is, we should be living today as if that were going to happen. And would we be proud of what we've built? And so I just always like to remind people, use technology in such a way that people remain at the center and we're making a better world. And that was part of the original idealism of open source, and I don't ever want to forget that.
Right. So I think that has seemed to me to be right at the core of what open source is really about. It's about taking out the barriers to people relating to one another.
Yeah.
Open source licensing is about removing the need to go get permission from someone before you engage.
That's right.
Open source governance is all about taking
Yeah.
the friction out of people relating and collaborating together.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting because it's not just about taking away the need to ask permission. I mean, that's a hugely important thing. But the thing that's kind of neat in this sort of promise theory area is it's really about setting up expectations and setting them up correctly. And when you set them up correctly, then people just know what to do. We did a session at Food Camp about this, and I was talking with John Allspaw from Etsy, and he used the analogy of running a relay race. You don't actually have to, the runner who's saying, okay, doesn't say, hand me the baton. It's more like, okay, they're kind of they know what the rules are, and they know whose job it is to hand off the baton, and who has sort of, and the guy simply says, stick. And puts his hand back, and the guy drops the stick into it because it's sort of worked out in advance, that these are the expectations. And I think there's a lot of areas where understanding what our expectations are and what they should be of each other is critical to how we deal with technology. Right. There's a great quote I saw recently from Gibu Thomas at Walmart. And he was just talking about privacy expectations of users. And, his comment was, don't be creepy. And the notion was, what's creepy is when we're working against you. Yep. What's not creepy is when we're using data to work for you. And that same notion, it's like, okay, if we really put the people in the equation and we're not prioritizing the needs of our company over the needs of our users, we do things differently. If we're prioritizing the needs of the company over the needs of the users, we start to abuse them, and people feel abused, because they are being, and so I think this, this with every technological advance, there's a moral dimension, and I think people forget that. It gets out of whack, and we have to remember it. I think we do better if we kind of work with that premise and ask ourselves all along, how is this going to work for people? And I think, I look at things like Google's Don't Be Evil motto and how much crap they got for it. And I would just say, I would far rather have people aspire to do the right thing and sometimes get it wrong than to pretend that it's not even a responsibility. And there's certainly a libertarian streak in tech, that basically says, no, as long as it's good for the company, as long as it's good for me, everybody's a free agent, and certainly we see that in Wall Street. We have an obligation to each other.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for organising OSCON. What is it? It's 15 years now, is it?
Would be, yeah.
Yeah.
No, more than that. Actually, it depends if you count from the very first Perl conference, in which case it would be 17 years, but I think it is 15 years of OSCON.
Well, I think we need it more than ever, so thank you for starting it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right.